Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and I think this video is going to, without a doubt, prove that we are in for a bumpy ride over the next 5 years, because I'm going to preface this video by saying that despite everything we are about to go through, Labour is still probably going to get into Parliament with a majority, and exactly what that is going to end up looking like I couldn't give you too many details beyond I know for a fact that I am genuinely probably going to be risking legal consequences for continuing this channel. And no, I don't even think that's hyperbole. The Tories, for some reason, have allowed the Equality Act to continue, allowed the Malicious Communications Act with the silly, grossly offensive bar to stay in place, and given the subjects that I talk about, there is no way that if I get the attention of the police in some way, that I won't be investigated. Despite absolutely everything I say being reasonable, especially my position on YIMBYism. But anyway, this video isn't about me, this video is about Labour being in complete and utter shambles. Now, let's get into why. So Labour withdraws support for Rochdale candidate Azhar Ali over Israel comments. And this was literally done yesterday, by the way. So in a sense, I'm glad that I have this cough that has stopped me from making videos this week, because holding off meant I could make this video. Labour has withdrawn support from Rochdale by-election candidate Azhar Ali over comments he apparently made about Israel and Jewish people. Labour had stood by Mr Ali when he claimed Israel had allowed the 7 October attacks by Hamas as a pretext to invade Gaza, which, as if that's still not Hamas's fault, but anyway. But it changed position after Mr Ali apparently also blamed Jewish media figures for fueling criticism against pro-Palestinian Labour MPs. Mr Ali has been contacted for comment, but no doubt he has not bothered, because I don't think he wants to shoot himself in the foot again. But this is the thing to bear in mind. Labour and Keir Starmer were still backing Mr Ali despite these absolutely insane comments. These things that people further to the right of me would say, oh, that's a based thing to say. Because the reality of the situation is, and I have genuinely been almost radicalised to this position, is that David Baddiel, I think, is just correct. I think to a lot of people it is just acceptable to be anti-Semitic. Because to me, this is on a level of black people saying that the white man controls everything and keeps black people down. It's on the same level as black people saying that the countryside is racist, which is obviously just an anti-white statement, and so therefore, because I put this on the same level, I take it as an anti-Semitic statement. And what did Labour do? They backed him until there was too much pressure from literally everyone else to say, stop being stupid. He will still be listed as the Labour candidate on the ballot paper as under electoral law. It is too late to replace him. However, it is understood that Mr Ali has been suspended from the party pending an investigation, so on the ballot card, it will say Mr Ali Labour. A lot of people might vote that just because they've not been following the news and tribalistically want to vote Labour, so he might still get in, but if he does get into Parliament, given he is suspended from the Labour Party, he will technically be an independent MP. However, there's a decent chance that he won't get into Parliament, but we'll get into that soon. Labour has spent days defending him as a candidate after the Mail on Sunday published comments from Mr Ali, claiming Israel had allowed the Hamas attack. Mr Ali subsequently apologised to Jewish leaders for my inexcusable comments. However, on Monday evening, the Daily Mail published a fuller recording, allegedly of Mr Ali blaming people in the media from certain Jewish quarters for the suspension of Andy MacDonald from the Labour Party. Mr Donald was suspended last year for saying, "We will not rest until we have justice, until all people, Israeli and Palestinians, between the river and the sea can live in peaceful liberty." Which at this point I think you have to be willfully unaware that the phrase "from the river to the sea" does effectively just mean I want a Palestinian state only. And while I do appreciate the addition of Israelis and Palestinians can live in peaceful liberty, making it slightly better than the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," I can still see why complaints were made and why he was suspended. Again, between the river and the sea, to me it's a bit like saying I want the Fourth Reich and pretending not to be a neo-Nazi. Because from my experience with all these protests, there has been absolutely no other reason to use that phrasing. But Mr MacDonald's suspension, obviously, I can see why people would bring that into question, but when it comes to Mr Ali's saying that there's a Jewish cabal controlling the media and the news cycle, I think on those grounds it is fair enough to suspend him, but again, Labour were backing him up until yesterday. They backed him for 2 days after it came out, he was talking about the Jewish cabal in media. This is why Labour seems to have the weakest leadership even compared to the Tories, to people that are actually following these stories, because Sunak isn't wrong that Keir Starmer is a weak leader who keeps U-turning, and trust me, we'll get into the U-turning soon. But the problem is that no one buys that Rishi Sunak is a strong leader, so it's a bit like two people on the opposite sides of the Commons firing water guns at each other. It's just really sad to see. Person on the recording goes on to say Israel planned to get rid of Palestinians from Gaza and grab the land. Well, I'm not being funny, but they've had literally almost a century to do that. I don't know why they would wait 80 years to grab all the land. They seemed happy to share it. He also appears to boast about preventing Israeli flags being flown from local public buildings after the deadly attack by Hamas gunmen on 7 October. This is the type of people that we have in public office and in public life, by the way. Because I'm very aware of all the arguments against, why are we flying Ukrainian flags? And I don't think it's bad to have solidarity with places that have endured attacks that are unjustified and in a lot of ways downright criminal. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for public buildings to fly the flag of Ukraine when they were being attacked. I think it's reasonable for council buildings to fly the flag of Israel after the October 7 attack. Because, after the Manchester bombings and after other terrorist attacks we've had in the UK, other countries fly the UK flag in solidarity to let them know we're thinking of you. I think that's fine. So, when it is Israelis that have been attacked and killed and effectively had a 9/11 thrust upon them, it makes sense to fly the Israeli flag, but obviously a lot of Labour councillors, and majority of them being Muslim, are out here saying, I am glad that we are not flying the Israeli flag, effectively because we hate Jews. And, there have also been recordings of mobs climbing council buildings to take off Israeli flags.
Take it down! Take it down! Take it down!
I mean it when I say this, by the way. Deport every single one of these people. Deport them all. None of them should be in the country. Because if it was just the opinion of, I don't really like Jews, I'd be fine with that. You can't choose your beliefs. You can't choose who you like and dislike. It's not a conscious decision. Acting on that conscious decision to try and coerce them and intimidate them and do these acts of conquest as much as they can in the UK, that they can control. That is a conscious decision. And because of that, they are absolutely criminals. And because an awful lot of them are foreign, we should have absolute authority to deport them from wherever they came from or wherever they choose to go. Wherever they consider their home, that is where they should go. Because I can tell you now, no one who considers Britain or England or Scotland their home would do something like that. Labour's National Campaign Coordinator Pat McFadden said Mr Ali was suspended after more comments came to light. Oh yeah, him saying that the October 7 attacks were a false flag, or they were, Israel let them happen, yeah, that was fine. As soon as he started saying Jewish people in the media, though, no, that was a step too far. Mr McFadden said that the fact you've got very rare circumstances where a political party is withdrawing support from a candidate after nominations have closed show Labour leader Keir Starmer was serious about rooting anti-Semitism out of the Labour Party. Of course, he's only going to do that when there's enough media pressure. Labour has faced intense pressure since Mr Ali's remark first surfaced, with widespread condemnation from party members and political rivals. Frontbenchers Lisa Nandy and Annalise Dodds had been out campaigning for Mr Ali at the weekend, after these recordings came out, by the way, and Shadow Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds was defending Labour's decision to back him on Monday morning. Total egg in their face. I don't think I could come up with a worse look for Labour than this. Because I think the Jewish thing and the media thing, I don't think that's as bad as his first comment of Israel knew about these attacks and let it happen as an excuse for genocide. I think that's a much worse thing to say than there is a Jewish cabal in the media, because both are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and to be honest, they're probably on a level with each other anyway. But the fact that people are happy to stand by him, and I mean, there's a picture at the bottom of this, you can even see Andy Burnham on the right there. Labour are not serious about getting rid of anti-Semitism. The only reason they're doing it is because there's media pressure on them to do so. And they're like the Tories, all they care about is power. And one of the main reasons you're going to want to keep Azhar Ali in Rochdale is because there is a sizable Muslim minority. 18.8% of Rochdale, according to the 2021 census, are Muslim. You have a Muslim candidate as a Labour Party, you effectively guarantee 20% of the vote right there. And then in Rochdale, because it's up into north, obviously it's a Labour heartland too, effectively they're doing this to try and guarantee the win in this by-election, but now they've embarrassed themselves. They've realised it's not worth the rejection of anti-Semitism that you see in pretty much the rest of the country. So as I say, total egg on their face. And the thing is that they probably wouldn't have got the entire Muslim vote anyway. Garza George Galloway becomes Rochdale by-election frontrunner. On a visit to the constituency, the Times finds the left-wing populist revelling in Labour's anti-Semitism crisis over its suspended candidate, Azhar Ali. And honestly, even if they didn't suspend him, I still think that it would have split the vote in Rochdale pretty badly. And the main reason for that, I think, is just because of this quote. This election is a straight choice between George, who will fight for Palestine, and the people of Rochdale, and Keir Starmer, who will fight for Israel. Honestly, quotes like this kind of scare me, because the subtext of this election promise is that things that happen in Britain don't particularly matter. British interest comes second to interests of Palestine, Israel, and the wider Islamic world. That is what George Galloway is saying here. When it comes to me being in Parliament, issues relating to Muslims, Muslim countries, whatever, come before that of the Brits. I don't know how to describe that as anything other than a foreign actor within our halls of power, despite the fact that George Galloway is obviously fully Scottish. But for some reason, Scottish nationalism has just turned into a total hatred for Britain, mainly because they hate the English. So it's not particularly surprising that an Islamophile said something like this, but the fact that he is on the ballot paper and has a good chance of winning now, yeah, I'm not going to lie, that's quite scary. You know, we're unironically getting to the point where a vote for Labour might be the sensible vote, because at least they actually do have the interests of Britain at heart. It's just they want really bad policy due to good intentions, but a misunderstanding of how economics, policy, and etc. all works. I mean, that is how down bad I am with politics right now. I am even saying that potentially Labour would be better than the alternative. Anyway, back to the article. There is a cardboard bowl filled with urine sitting in the middle of George Galloway's by-election campaign headquarters. That is a very strange way to start this article. The former Labour MP turned populist renegade has based himself in the garage of a second-hand car dealership at the end of Rochdale town centre, and one of the mechanics working overnight has been unable to access the toilets. By-elections are never glamorous, said an aide, hastily pouring the liquid down the drain. It may not be the lap of luxury, but it's from this base that Galloway hopes to reinsert himself into parliamentary politics come the by-election on February 29. For reference, George Galloway used to be a Labour MP but was suspended from the party due to his constant opposition to the war on terror in 2003. Sitting in an office above the showroom, he is in high spirits, having the night before being handed a major fillip by Labour's disowning of the candidate Azhar Ali over leaked anti-Semitic remarks about Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. If he'd written this script, it would have been rejected as far-fetched. That here I am in a by-election, and it's Labour that is exploding in an anti-Semitism row, said Galloway, who throughout his 40 years in politics has been an outspoken opponent of Israel. Until now, Galloway, 69, who is standing for the Workers' Party, had only an outsider's chance of winning this election. Now he's a frontrunner. Mainly because, as it goes on to say, he refers to himself as Garza George Galloway in his campaign literature. He has so far concentrated his efforts solely on Rochdale's Muslim community, and he will hope to sweep up much of Labour's 9,600 vote majority. Despite Labour's strong majority in the seats, there was an apprehension among insiders over the party's ability to retain it, even before Ali's removal. And this is the thing I'm hating about Britain at the moment. A lot of campaigning at the moment is all about a foreign war. It's about a war that shouldn't affect us. It's about a war where I support tacit support of some Navy reconnaissance ships in the Mediterranean to help out Israel, because they will pay us for it. But my God, the amount of people we have in this country that are just openly, effectively calling for genocide, and then we have judges who see them calling for this sort of thing and say, oh no, they're just misunderstood, and let them go, while at the same time punishing police officers for racist private WhatsApp messages. Because as much as it's a meme for the left wing to say normal island because there's some rich people, we have a monarchy, and most people know that a woman has a vagina, stuff like this is genuinely not normal. It is not normal to have a judiciary that is absolutely okay with being selective with their prosecutions based on the groups that are suffering the offence, even though I don't think anyone should go to jail for messages sent in a private group chat, unless obviously it's conspiracy to commit a crime, but sending a spicy meme should not land someone in a court. Anyway, that's a different issue completely. Let's carry on. Galloway has in the past proved himself a fly in the ointment of Labour's electoral plans after being expelled for his criticism of Tony Blair over the Iraq War. He went on to take 2 seats from Labour, Benthall Green and Bow in 2005, and Bradford West in 2012, both of which had large Muslim populations. And my God, by the way. While in that seat, it was being challenged by Naz Shah, who has been the incumbent of that seat ever since the 2015 election. And just listen to this story from 2015. The campaign that followed was truly vicious. Shah was open about her traumatic history, abandoned by her father at 6, sent to Pakistan to escape the depredations of her mother's drug dealer partner, whom her mother later murdered at 12, subject to a forced marriage at 15. Instead of sympathy, she received horrendous abuse. Galloway accused her of being a liar, of leading a squalid, sorry life, of the slander of her own family, community and city, of peddling racist stereotypes. At a stormy public debate, he waved what he claimed was her Pakistani marriage certificate to show she had been married at 16, not 15, because that's so much better. There were questions about her integrity, her first forced marriage. It was very distasteful, says Shafiq. People thought, if this is how he speaks to her, how would he speak to my daughter? Elsewhere, Ben Judah, a reporter for Politico, claimed to have been hounded out of respect meeting by Galloway lackeys, who punched him in the face and called him a fucking Jew. Again, YouTube, that is me quoting George Galloway's entourage. But this is the type of person that George Galloway is. He is such a ridiculous Islamophile and wants to put the Islamic world and Islamic countries above everything else to such an extent that I think he is genuinely dangerous for Parliament. Yet the way our constitution works, there's no right to stop him getting in there, apart from stopping him getting in elections. And if we actually had British constituencies, rather than in, frankly, what some places are just open colonies, you'd never see anyone like that near Parliament. But thank you to mass immigration, we now have colonies dotted all over the UK, especially in major cities, of which Rochdale is part of Greater Manchester. So expect way worse things than that. Muslims make up just under a third of Rochdale's population. That's what I mean. And there has been a fear that the contest will expose the growing rift within the party over the struggle to retain support among Muslim voters, while regaining the confidence of British Jews. Good one. Since October 7, dozens of councillors around the former textiles town of Lancashire have quit the party over its stance on Gaza. Labour now support a sustainable ceasefire, however Starmer has faced criticism for not calling it earlier. And it's because, yeah, all these old textile towns, as people who used to live there will just quite openly say, they are just new colonies of Muslim immigrants, and that's not a good thing. But obviously to many leftists, it is a good thing because revenge. And that's pretty much the only reason. So that's where we're up to with Rochdale at the moment. George Galloway looks like he's going to get into Parliament yet again by courting the large Muslim minorities, which he has done in the past and no doubt will do until the day he dies or retires from politics, because he's an absolute pro-Islam loon. And clearly Labour are trying to get into that vote until they realise that it wasn't acceptable at all. And the thing is, it's not just Rochdale this week where they've had to suspend a Labour candidate. Graham Jones, Labour suspends second candidate over Israel comments. Hyndburn hopeful recorded at same scandal hit meeting that led to Azhar Ali's suspension in Rochdale. Bear in mind that Keir Starmer has tried to get rid of this issue. He's tried to get rid of the anti-Semitism issue because there was obviously a large issue of that under Jeremy Corbyn, yet the remnants still remain. The problem was that bad, that there are still these anti-Semites still lurking around in Labour, and it's perfectly sensible and obviously good politics to get rid of bigots from your own party. The issue we have is that they are perfectly, all parties I mean, are perfectly happy with keeping in anti-British bigots. And yes, that does include the Tories. They're just not as bad as Labour and the rest. And obviously you've got Reform that, as far as I'm concerned, don't have anyone in there, as far as I'm aware of, I mean, at least there's been no big scandals about it, who are bigoted in any way. They just seem to be pro-British. Thank God for that. Labour has been plunged into crisis after Sir Keir Starmer was forced to suspend a second parliamentary candidate in 2 days over renewed allegations of anti-Semitism in the party. The Labour leader acted after Graham Jones, the former MP and candidate for Hydeburn, was recorded claiming Britons who volunteered to fight for Israel Defence Force should be locked up. He was also heard referring to fucking Israel in a meeting in Lancashire last year. His suspension follows that of Azir Ali, Labour's pick for Rochdale by-election later this month, who was recorded making anti-Semitic remarks at the same meeting. Just absolutely crazy that if you go and join an allied force, you should be locked up. That is the opinion of a Labour MP, because there is an absolute pathological hate for Israel within the party, well, within a lot of its activists and MPs anyway. And I honestly don't think that Starmer is going to manage to get it out root and stem without effectively ruining his own election chances. I think the problem runs that widely within the party. To which, for some reason, a lot of Labour activists say, well, if I can't vote Labour, who have I got to vote for? You have a wealth of choice. Lib Dems, they're ridiculously left-wing. Greens, even more ridiculously left-wing. You have all these smaller parties that come out everywhere. You know, the Workers' Party that George Galloway is part of. You have the SNP in Scotland, Plaid Cymru in Wales. You have Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. You have this wealth of choice. If you ask a righty who they vote for, if they don't like the Tories, it's like, well, you got Reform, but as lots of people are saying, that they're not really good at letting people know what they are for. And what they're for is generally things that I would like to see. Lower taxes, immigration that's net zero, which I am told by the right that if you actually have net zero immigration, that's somehow worse for Britain. Don't ask me why. Honestly, the online right seems to be full of absolute morons. But back to the point at hand, Labour clearly has an anti-Semitism problem, but I think if they actually try to address it properly, they would see a genuinely sizable reduction in their popularity, because a large portion of their voter base are the people at the pro-Palestine marches, the peace marches, the call for ceasefire that involve paraphernalia of parachuting men who were the type of men who came in to kill and rape Israeli women and children. And effectively, if they were honest and didn't risk going to jail over it, would probably just be openly anti-Semitic. Because we've seen enough evidence that when they're recorded quietly, they are openly anti-Semitic. And these are the type of people that I don't think should be in the country. And then you've got another problem in that there's also a sizable chunk of their vote who are your naive middle class types who see all these people calling for a ceasefire and buy into it because they don't do their homework. And honestly, if nothing else, this is going to be my biggest push ever for getting rid of universal suffrage. There is absolutely no reason that someone who is uninformed should vote. Because as Robert Heinlein put it in Starship Troopers, voting is a type of force. And force, my friends, is violence. And violence is the supreme authority from which all other authority derives. So when you vote, you are using violence, and it's a responsibility that you need to be very careful with. And majority of people in the UK are just not thoughtful or responsible with it. Hence, we've ended up with a 20th century that is just absolutely all over the place when it comes to British politics. This is honestly part of the reason why it's actually quite a miracle that Europe still has functioning economies. It's because at any point where it looks like the economy is going to go badly, they panic and have to go back to default. Oh, we need to privatise things. And I suppose on the bright side, that mass immigration is probably going to get to such a bad point that they are going to panic and start doing mass deportations, simply because there's going to be too much violence on the street otherwise. Is that going to happen in our lifetimes? God only knows, but what I do know is that Reform is the right direction. Please vote for them. Anyway, back to this recording, because there's even more to it than I thought. It's also emerged that Ali told the meeting that the only reason shadow ministers had not resigned over Starmer's stance on the conflict last year was that Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, had told them doing so would weaken the Palestinian voice in Parliament. Again, that is just an open statement that our shadow cabinet and what is going to be our actual cabinet have foreign voices and foreign interests at their heart. That is effectively what that is saying. Ali told those present that at least 4 shadow ministers were ready to quit, but they've not resigned as shadow ministers because they're all pro-Palestinian, and he, Zomlot, said, "You go and I guarantee you pro-Israel supporters will be put in your place, so actually instead of thinking you're doing something really good, what you're going to do is you're going to weaken the Palestinian voice in Parliament." And I absolutely love how it is the Palestinian ambassador who is having to tell the Labour shadow cabinet, are you idiots? This is how you do good politicking. Literally have to tell professional politicians how to be decent and good and effective politicians. We have an embarrassing state in the UK. 8 shadow frontbenchers lost their job in November after they defied Starmer to back a ceasefire in the Commons. Zomlot and Ali were contacted for comment, and no doubt neither of them said anything. I mean, it really does show you how much of a mess British politics is, that within the two great parties there is just constant non-stop infighting. And the thing is that this is why I can see myself voting Tory in about 5 years. Typically when the Tories are out of power, they actually unite. They start seeing what Labour are doing and say, wow, this is really bad, we need to stop this, and then unite around one particular faction of the probably 8 that they have, but 3 main ones that they have within the party. Because clearly trying to have that revolution while within power doesn't work. Case in point, Liz Truss. And then we've ended up with Rishi Sunak, who, for lack of a better term, was clearly the continuity candidate from Cameron. Like, there's a clear through line through all of the prime ministers up until Rishi Sunak, and he is the one that is going to lose it, because absolutely no one in the party is wanting to deal with any of the other factions. And I know for a fact that the membership is mostly in favour of Liz Truss, even after she, quote-unquote, ruined the economy by the Bank of England keeping information from her when she was putting out her mini-budget. Because a lot of the Tory party are actually quite intelligent people that can understand in politics what is going on. They are effectively... They're probably people that would enjoy my channel, but they're all boomers, so don't go on YouTube. And I think even the ones that wanted Rishi Sunak don't like where he has gone. It's turned out, oh, he is completely useless and it is just doing what Boris Johnson was doing anyway. Except that when it comes to polling, he has dropped 20 points from when Boris Johnson was, even at his lowest point. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the Tory party elites and Tory party HQ have shot themselves in the foot, and they are ripe for revolution. But the thing is that I say all this because it's a hopeful message. Labour are infighting right before an election, and they're not even in power. When you are not in power, that is when you need someone like Corbyn, or what Keir Starmer was trying to do, and you need to purge the deadwood from your party. The problem with Keir Starmer is that he doesn't want to do too much of it, because he's probably the minority in his party at the moment, especially when it comes to the membership, because the membership is full of students and young people who are effectively Corbynistas. And the thing is, they are the same people that are on board with Israel being the worst thing in the Middle East, which informs light to explicit anti-Semitism within the party. And there's no way Keir Starmer's going to be able to get rid of that. It is that ingrained. And of course, then there is a large naive faction that are saying, oh, they're not anti-Semitic, they're just criticising Israel. No, these are people that are trying to justify the October the 7th attack. These are people that are trying to say Israel has no right to defend itself. And the only reason that you don't think someone has a right to defend themselves is because you don't see them as human, because that is a basic human right. But anyway, I want to move away from talking about all that anti-Semitism stuff, because Labour are falling apart in more than just that way. Labour staff left in tears by Sue Gray's leak inquiry, union complaints filed as Keir Starmer's chief of staff is accused of heavy-handed investigation into how decisions to scrap Green Pledge ended up in press. Now, I do want to go on a quick tangent about Sue Gray. I do not like her. She was obviously a Labour Party activist, while she was supposed to be a completely apolitical civil servant who wrote up the report on what Boris Johnson did. And having read parts of that report, it was quite clear that Sue Gray was doing her best to take every situation and make it look as horrible as possible for Boris Johnson. And what happens as soon as that report is sent in and she doesn't need to work on it anymore? She's offered a job by Keir Starmer to become Chief of Staff for the Labour Party. And oh, what happens a couple of months after that? Her son manages to get into the Labour candidateship to become an MP in a Labour safe seat. If you wanted a blatant show of corruption from the Labour Party, Sue Gray would be my example. And the thing is, she's been brought in because she is very good at purging prime ministers, so she's going to be very good at purging troublemakers in the Labour Party. That is probably the main reason she has been brought in. Labour staff have filed a complaint against Sue Gray's handling of a leak inquiry in an escalation of hostilities between party officials and Keir Starmer's chief of staff. And quite frankly, I think she should be brought in front of some other committee in Parliament because of the way she handled the Boris Johnson report. Because with the committee on Boris Johnson, she had to completely change the criteria for finding Boris Johnson to have broken the rules, in that originally it said He willfully lied to Parliament, i.e. he lied to Parliament knowing he was lying, to recklessly lying to Parliament, which basically means, oh, he didn't tell the truth, but it was a big lie, you know? Which he didn't, because he was told by his staff that he wasn't breaking COVID rules, and as far as he was concerned, that was the truth. Anyway, that's a bygone era. I could have done a video at the time and I didn't. That's my own fault. I'm not going to make one here. Party officials say they were denied due process, had their phones inspected, and their workplace rights violated during the course of an internal investigation led by Gray last week. Workplace rights violated. I'd love to see what they mean by that. The investigation centred on a story that appeared in The Guardian and correctly predicted a U-turn on Labour's 28 billion green investment pledge, and that's not the only U-turn they've had recently. Gray is said to have inspected the phones of staff and spoken to several during interviews without trade union representatives present. She was also in the parliamentary meeting from which details were leaked, prompting allegations of a conflict of interest and suspicion that her allies may have been responsible. And this is what I find so funny about this. I can believe that Sue Gray is getting big for her boots in the Labour Party. You go from being the civil servant who brings down Boris Johnson, you're going to get big-headed. You go straight to Chief of Staff of Labour, of course you're going to throw your weight around like this. Because she probably genuinely feels invincible. She feels like Starmer is going to protect her no matter what. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of these allegations at the very least are true. But I genuinely hope she will be investigated, because as far as I'm concerned, Sue Gray should be in jail. Some of those who were told to turn over their phones with senior members of Starmer's team, Gray has since called some of those affected to apologise. Some were said to have been left in tears by her alleged heavy-handedness. It is not clear whether a leaker has been identified or whether Gray has evidence of any unauthorised disclosure to begin with. It is understood that Labour Party branch of the GMB union has submitted a formal complaint about Gray's investigation to the party's General Secretary, David Evans. It later sent an all-staff email reminding employees of their rights during a workplace investigation. A party spokesman said he did not comment on disciplinary matters, but a source confirmed that there was an investigation last week which spoke to a number of staff members. So Sue Gray threw her weight around, people were not happy with it, and it caused the unions that are on board with Labour to have to inform all of their employees, hey, if you're being investigated, this is what you can and can't do, because it appears to be that badly handled. And is this going to keep the Labour supporting unions on side with Labour? Well, it's going to make a lot of them question whether they should still support them. Because the thing is, I can absolutely understand someone in the Labour Party leaking this U-turn, because a lot of people in the Labour Party are just stop oil activists. They're the type of people that think we're going to burn the world down because we didn't get carbon emissions completely cut down to zero 20 years ago. So obviously this was going to be an attack on Keir Starmer not being fully on board with green investment, and so they were mad and leaked it. I can completely believe that happened. Doesn't give Sue Gray the right to violate workers' rights, whatever the hell that means, but to be fair, not having a union representative during an investigation when you're being interrogated, yeah, that's actually bad. I do agree that is a bad thing. But Sue Gray does have a history of effectively getting people kicked out for the smallest of infractions. Again, Boris Johnson being my big example where, again, I don't think he did anything wrong. I don't think he lied to Parliament, because you have to know that you are lying to lie, realistically. And therefore, he didn't willfully mislead Parliament, as has been claimed over and over again. Because how could he? As far as he was concerned, when he said to Parliament he was following the rules, he thought he was. He was told he was by his own private secretaries. He did all due diligence, and all that due diligence put him in the position he was in because they all got it wrong. Like, these things happen. But I don't even think that's the harshest thing Sue Gray has done. Her supposedly uncompromising approach to disciplinary matters has long been a popular topic of discussion among civil servants. In 2022, Ryan Heath, a former speechwriter for Gus O'Donnell, now Lord O'Donnell, who was Cabinet Secretary under Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and David Cameron, said he had abruptly been sacked at Gray's behest for using government email address to invite friends and family to a book lunch. Gray decided I'd misused government resources in sending that email. I could have sent it from my Gmail account, but instead I saved time by using the auto prompt to call up colleague addresses in my work Outlook account. Heath wrote for the Politico website. To do so, I used a government computer placed on a government desk as I sat on a government chair illuminated by government lights. This victimless crime is committed thousands of times by civil servants each day, emailing spouses and parents and friends, but for Gray it was reason enough to kick me out of a job, and just like that, I was gone. just completely unreasonable, and I wouldn't be shocked if Gus O'Donnell was actually someone who they wanted to kick out for some time for some other reason, and Sue Gray was on board with that. Not that I'm necessarily accusing her of corruption for this particular story, however, I would happily accuse her of being corrupt in the Boris Johnson scandal, because of all the evidence of her changing the criteria for punishing Boris Johnson and finding him guilty, and then moving straight to work for the opposition. You ask me, that is the sign of someone who is just openly corrupt and doesn't care if they get caught, because they are that entrenched in the system. And from the sounds of all this, it even seems like Sue Gray is almost head of the Labour Party at this point. Last week, the Sunday Times reported that Labour was to hire 2 new policy advisors, one from the Tony Blair Institute, after private talks between Gray and the former Prime Minister. She is said to be sympathetic shadow cabinet ministers to be unimpressed with the calibre of some of Starmer's policy advisors, and allegedly macho culture in party HQ. I do not believe that for a second. And perceptions that politicians are frozen out of decision-making processes. By contrast, her increasingly agitated circle of detractors believe that her role in preparing for government and deciding who will join Starmer in Downing Street if he wins election has given her too much power. And that seems to be the case if she's literally picking policy advisors. Gray is also said to have resisted what the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has by last week concluded was an inevitable shift on the party's Green Prosperity Plan. She was said to be opposed to any decision that left Starmer open to accusations of inconsistency. And this is the thing, Sue Gray clearly has an awful lot of power and is clearly one of the main reasons we're getting so many U-turns from Labour Party policy, which, I mean, I was going to go through it, but I won't waste your time on it. There's a Politico article of all Keir Starmer's Labour U-turns in one place, and the list is up to 27, and that is mostly made up of things in the past few months, though does list them all from when he became leader in 2021. Take a look through it if you want, but you will see that the U-turns start ramping up after Sue Gray actually joined the Labour Party. So it's no duh that she has an awful lot of power here, and giving a civil servant all that power kind of implies that the civil servants actually do run the country. But as it's clearly shown by her history in the civil service and her recent history within the Labour Party, if Labour was serious about getting rid of the anti-Semitism problem, they would get Sue Gray to make an inquiry and find absolutely every anti-Semite within the party and get them kicked out, because Sue Gray would have that power and would be able to do it, because that's clearly her expertise. If there is someone that the civil servant or Labour don't like, she is put in charge to kick them out. So if they were serious about getting rid of anti-Semitism, she'd be put in charge. But the problem is that you would probably see more than half Labour MPs be kicked out the party, and so it's just not politically viable to kick out half your MPs. Which to me screams that Labour are absolutely fine with anti-Semitism as long as it gets them into Parliament. They're fine with it as long as it's not too explicit. You know, you're explicit in this recording, then you get kicked out. There's nothing we can do about it. But as long as you just touch upon it, you know, only criticise Israel, you're absolutely fine. And unironically, a lot of normies seem to be seeing through it at this point. I mean, there is basically no one I know who is actually excited or even fully knows who they're going to vote for in the next election. A lot of left-wingers I know, they don't really know if they're going to vote Labour. They might go Lib Dem, they might go Green, depending if they're centre-left or far-left. They have no idea. Pretty much every Tory voter I know, they're weighing up options between... they are in two camps. It's either get Tories in because they're better than Labour, which I do agree with, but I am fed up of being insane and expecting a different result every time, or they're voting Reform because we just need something different this time, come on. But the arguments around all of these things, as far as I'm concerned, are legitimate and they're all worth weighing up. I don't know who you should vote for next time if you're on the right wing. Maybe go for a smaller party like Libertarian Party. I don't know. We're in a mess. We're in a bind. We're not going to do anything until the Tory party actually rally around one particular leader who's going to lead us through and actually bring a new right-wing paradigm into the country, because there's no way we can stay in this post-war consensus any longer. And I think Matt Goodwin's correct. I don't think that anyone is prepared for just how much of a cultural shift we're going to see within Britain over the next 30 years or so. Because everyone has seen the failures of multiculturalism, left, liberal policy, equality, diversity, inclusion and all that. It's not made the country particularly bigger. It's completely stalled productivity in the public sector. People feel like they're getting poorer. Things are just getting worse all around, and everyone's noticing. There is no one who isn't noticing. Even my parents, who are relatively typical boomers, are understanding the plight of the impossibility of buying a house, the difficulty of being a man in the modern day and age. Everyone is noticing. But I think the problem is that an awful lot of millennials and Zoomers, because they've grown up in what they only know as a Tory world, they think that it is ultra-capitalist and effectively Maggie Thatcher's Britain, which it hasn't been since Maggie Thatcher was kicked out in 1989. So getting them to convert to a reasonable position might be quite difficult, but while we've still got the boomers and people who are noticing these things, I think it's fair to say that we're going to have a good result before 2030, with 5 years of clownishness from Labour. And I think that'll be the big thing. Zoomers and millennials, if Labour get in, they're going to have their hand forced onto the stove of what they want, even though a lot of them will say, oh, it's Starmer, I don't like Starmer. No, this is what you're always going to get with Labour. This is probably what you'd get under Corbyn, because you'd probably see a big military coup with Corbyn, because Corbyn is an enemy of the state. This is what you're going to get. We need a completely different paradigm. Socialism is not the way to go. I don't care how much you try and claim it is. I see you all on TikTok. You are going to have your hand to the fire. You are going to learn that it burns you, and you are going to learn that there is a more sensible politics out there, one that we probably can't even conceive yet. But this is the state of the UK we are in at the moment. Labour is falling apart, but still doing very well. That's just because every other party is completely falling apart, or Tories anyway. Nobody really knows who the Lib Dems are. You don't see them campaigning at all. The Greens are still a meme. Reform is rising in the polls, and that is mainly due to protest votes of Tories. It's just an open door for Labour, and there's actually a good chance that they're going to screw it up and we're going to get a hung parliament. A hung parliament that nobody wants. A hung parliament where more people would probably want to see King Charles be an absolute monarch than have Parliament make any decisions. But hey, maybe that'll radicalise the parties to actually be useful for once. Wouldn't that be nice? But hey, you might even see me trying to go for candidacy in 2029. And that would also be nice, but anyway. For now, though, that's everything I have for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.